As for Mr. Rustad, he says he will continue to stay on as an MLA for now, but will not run in the next election. And Mr. Rustad joins us live, I believe, from the BC legislature right now. Hi there. Good to meet you. Good to have you on the program. Thanks for making the time.
It's good to meet you as well. Thank you for having me on today.
Mr. Rustad, we just heard you explain to British Columbians who were watching that you stepped down today to avoid your party descending into a, quote, civil war. Respectfully, hadn't it already?
No, I think there's a lot of internal squabbling that's been going on. There's lots of issues that have been happening. But when you start, legal battles, when you start a process that could ultimately drive people away and split the party into different factions, I think that is what the risk is here. And, first and foremost, I've always said that being a leader is about standing for what's right, fighting for the average everyday person. And so if I was going to carry on with that fight, I started thinking about it and realized that's actually now about me, not about leadership, not about what's in the best interest of the province or the party. And that's what ultimately led me to the decision to change my position and to resign as leader of the Conservative Party of British Columbia today.
With great respect, Mr. Rustad, why didn't you come to the realization that it would be about you earlier? And I ask because as I look through what's unfolded over the last number of months, I mean, you came so close to winning the election, but since then you lost 5 MLAs, some of whom have said directly that your leadership or lack thereof was a part of why they were leaving. Yes, you got nearly 71% in your leadership review, but less than 20% of members even voted. Fundraising is so low that likely in this fourth quarter you will be out fundraised by the Greens. In October, your party president and 6 other members of the management committee wrote to you asking you to step down. How much better shape would your party be in today if you had made this decision sooner, sir?
Well, that's an interesting question. And, any party that has a leadership change in terms of going through a leadership race faces all kinds of challenges and issues. There are certainly still issues within the Conservative Party of British Columbia that need to be cleaned up. Those are issues that I was trying to work on to get addressed. But unfortunately, we're in a situation where that was becoming impossible to be able to actually fix moving forward. As you know, in politics, there's always people with differing views. There's always different people that want to see their perspective come forward in a party. And the Conservative Party of British Columbia is no different than that. And those became dominant, where what we should have been doing is talking more and more about the issues in British Columbia. The opposition to an oil pipeline, the fact that we've got our forest sector in a crisis, the fact that we've got drugs and crime that are rampant in our streets, a deficit, quite frankly, that's on the road to bankruptcy. These are the things that I have been focused on and talking about, but it's clear to me now that it's going to be impossible to carry on with that type of conversation and fight while the infighting is carrying on within the Conservative Party of British Columbia.
I think you make a good point, Mr. Rustad, in that any democracy functions best when there is a very strong opposition. And so I'll put to you again, what responsibility do you, as leader of the party, bear for a diminishing strength, the diminishing strength of your party in opposition? And I understand that there are squabbles. There's one MLA who leaves or another. There can be friction. But this was not isolated, right? I mean, you have one MLA who quit your caucus who said that, and quoted you, that if they didn't like his leadership, they can get the F out. Again, Mr. Rustad, with great respect, what responsibility do you bear for the position your party finds itself in today?
Well, let's look at where our party is. We are, according to the latest polls, we're somewhere between 2 and 8 points up in a lead over the NDP. So I would ask, is that a bad position for our party to be in? I would say no. Our party has actually been very effective in holding this government to account. We've been very effective on the issues that matter to British Columbians. They've been fighting these issues. We've been continuing to connect with people around the province. Unfortunately, like I say, when you have this kind of infighting and stuff that's going on, it runs the risk of losing the narrative of the Conservative Party being ready to lead and to fight the next election. And that's what I have to consider first and foremost. But as for holding the government to account, I mean, we've been doing that very well, very effectively. As a matter of fact, we just wrapped up the fall sitting of the legislature here in British Columbia. And, I would say that the governing party, the NDP, have had a very bad time, a very rough time of it this fall.
Do you think, and believe me, I've had multiple opportunities where I've given really hard interviews to the Premier, so I do take your point on accountability on that side of the legislature. But do you really, Mr. Rustad, think that if you had been leader of the party and headed to an election anytime soon, you could have won? I mean, all the speculation in your province right now is that the Premier is going to head to an election soon because he thinks he can secure a bigger win.
Well, this is the risk now in terms of the step that I've taken. If I had have taken it earlier, I do know for a fact that the Premier was doing all the work to prep for an election this fall. He was hiring additional people to come in. He was working on his teams and strategy. He was approaching people about running as appointments in a snap election. They were doing everything to prep for an election. So if we had been into a leadership race, 2 or 3 months ago, we very well might have been in a position where we would be facing an election. But I think it's highly unlikely at this particular point, especially given the deficit that the NDP is in terms of the polls, where we're sitting in a 2 to 8 point lead. I think it would be very highly unlikely that they will go to election at this particular point. But it certainly was a significant risk this fall, and it's one of the reasons why I needed to stay in place and continue the fight, even with the internal issues that were going on.
But those internal issues have now led to a situation where if your parties were to go to an election, the NDP, I read today, has amassed a war chest of $9 million in assets. Your party is on track to raise only $350,000 in the fourth quarter. Like, how can you argue tonight that you put your party in a relatively better position to fight an election when the math just doesn't add up?
Well, first of all, I don't believe those numbers, and that number was put out, and quite frankly, I think it's a false number. I know exactly where the finances are in the party. I know how much money that we have, and I know what our burn rate is, and I also know the amount of money that was coming in. I know the fundraising that was lined up for the month of December, and I can tell you it would have been significantly higher than the number that you have quoted. So I was not feared, and I'm still not afraid of going to an election. But it's probably worth noting that money is important in an election, but money doesn't win an election. If that was the case, I would expect the Conservative Party, the Federal Conservative Party would have won the last election. They had way more money than the Federal Liberal Party. But money, like I say, doesn't make the difference. It helps, but it is not the only factor in elections.
You're going to stay on as an MLA. I heard you say in your press conference today, but you won't run in the next election. Do you think I mean, there's a lot that went on behind the scenes right up until the last hour yesterday with, a slim majority of your MLAs essentially signing a letter asking you to step aside. Is your presence in caucus going to be divisive?
I don't think so. At least certainly that's my hope. The way I've always worked, I don't hold grudges. I have no hard feelings towards anybody. My role that I see as a former leader of this party, and certainly when I was the leader of this party, is always to do what is right, to fight, to build the party, to make sure I support our caucus, and to make sure that we're as well positioned as we can for the next election. That doesn't change just because I've stepped down as leader. I'm prepared to do the work that caucus would like me to do to be able to support the party. I'm prepared to actually do the work of continuing to strengthen this party and try to build out the membership in this party. And in whatever role and capacity that I need to be there, that's what I will do. And if some people have an issue with me being there, I'll find ways to be able to work through that, listening to their voices and finding out how it can work. But certainly in the conversations I've had with many of the caucus members at this point, they have no issue with me staying on. There may be some that do, but I'm sure we'll work through those issues.
Should your colleagues trust you when you say you'll be able to work through it, particularly since you were not able to as leader?
Well, it's a very different situation when you're the leader because you obviously got all these different views and you're trying to weigh one view over another. As a caucus member, it's a support role in terms of where the party is going and how we are going after the NDP. I think the error on my part would be, quite frankly, if I were to try to assert myself as being leader or with the ideas, then that's certainly not going to be my intent. My intent is to be able to support our caucus, to be able to support our party, and to carry on with pushing for the issues that are important to me and that I think are important for British Columbia, which is bringing that common sense, government, fiscally responsible government, into place into British Columbia and winning this next election.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Mr. Rustad, appreciate your time this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me on. Take care.